welcome to Behavioral Grooves. My name is Kurt Nelson.
And I'm Tim Houlihan. Behavioral Grooves is the podcast voted #1 by Habit Weekly.
Woohoo!
And is considered a global top 20 social science podcast by Chartable. So we're here to tackle the why we do what we do. And we have amazing researchers, inspired authors, and sharp practitioners of behavioral science to help us do that. We bring them to you for the purpose of expanding the community of those interested in applied behavioral science.
That's right, Tim. And for more than 3 years, we've done this without advertising. If you're interested in giving us a boost, a monthly subscription for the cost of a single cup of coffee per se, we encourage you to check out our Patreon page at www.patreon.com/behavioral grooves. And that's Patreon, Patreon.com. And sign up for a level that works for your budget.
Yeah.
We'd greatly appreciate it.
We absolutely do. And let's also just quickly note that if you'd like to hear some of these authors live and have a chance to interact with them, well, then check out the virtual conference that Kurt and I are hosting on January 8th, 2021. And it's called Nudge It North. Then there'll be links in the show notes so that you can go out and register for that.
Yeah, and just remember to use the code GROOVES to get your Behavior Grooves 15% discount off the cost of a ticket. You will not want to miss the lineup that we have for our inaugural event, and we hope to see you there.
Absolutely. Okay, so shall we share our best behavioral book recommendations for 2020, Kurt?
I think that sounds like a great idea. We get to share this. So without further ado, let's review the books that Tim and I consider to be the most influential books that we read during 2020.
Okay. All right. You want to start first? You want to start with? Should we start with the top 10, basically? 5 from you, 5 from me.
Well, why don't we start with just some of the books, just reviewing all of the authors that we interviewed that were on the show. And it's sorry to say we have so many authors that we couldn't include all of them in our top 10 books. But man, these are great books that we got to interview these authors from, and it's an amazing list. So do you want to just go through that list?
Sure.
And in advance, if we might have missed one or two, so we apologize in advance if you're an author and we forgot to mention your book and we interviewed you. It's just because there's so many great ones out there.
Yeah, so we did have 72 unique guests in 2020, and 18 of them, at least 18 of them, were authors. So it is pretty cool. Okay, so Alchemy by Rory Sutherland.
Woo!
Yeah. Messengers, Who We Listen To, Who We Don't, and Why by Steve Martin and Joe Marks.
Okay, I'm going to woohoo on all of these, so I'm just not going to woohoo right now because every single one gets a woohoo.
How to Decide by Annie Duke. Good Habits, Bad Habits by Wendy Wood. Anxiety, the Missing Stage of Grief by Claire Bidwell Smith. Perfectly Hidden Depression, How to Break Free from the Perfectionism That Masks Your Depression by Margaret Robinson Rutherford. Designing for Behaviors Change by Steve Wendell. The Power of Bad by Roy Baumeister and John Tierney. The All or Nothing Marriage, How the Best Marriages Work by Eli Finkel. Blindsight, mostly hidden ways marketing shapes our brains by Prince Guman and Matt Johnson. Ripple, the big effects of small behavior change in business, Jez Groom and April Vellicott. Behavioral Insights by Michael Halsworth and Elspeth Kirkman. From Individual Well-Being to Collective Welfare by Cornelia Walter. Unconscious by Joel Weinberger. By the way, that was recorded in June, but is not yet published. So just to let you know. Unleash Your Primal Brain by Tim Ash. Also recorded, but not yet published. Engaged by Amy Bucher. Before You Know It by John Barge. Better, Not Perfect by Max Bazerman. And Max's episode is not yet published either. That's coming out shortly.
Fantastic.
It's a hell of a list.
It is a list. And so now let's just talk about our top 10. And so you get 5, I get 5. We'll try not to double up, even though I would love to. I know we're going to double up on these. And again, these are just the books that we read. And so it doesn't necessarily have to be somebody that we interviewed. And actually, I know my first one is one that we have not interviewed. I would love to interview this author but we haven't had that opportunity yet. So if anybody knows Robert Sapolsky and can make an introduction to us, that would be fantastic, because his book Behave is my first pick for my 2020 book the recommendation for anybody out there. It is a massive book. It is huge, but it is packed full of just really relative information. If you want to understand why we do what we do, oh my gosh, this is the book to read, because it gets into our brain neurology, the different neurotransmitters that are in there, how our brain is structured, but then it gets into a variety of behavioral aspects and the context aspects and different things. I use a highlighting thing, highlighting, I don't even know what you call it.
It's your reading tool. It's your online reading tool.
It's an online reading tool. It's called Readwise, that I can, when I'm in an electronic book or article, I can highlight it and it captures it. And then every day I get a email that says, here are 6 highlights that you have picked from all the books that I've read. And so I get to reinforce that going onward. It's a great app. I recommend it for anybody. Again, Readwise. And so I'm going through this, and I'm just looking at a variety of different books, right? So I have, Persuasion by Robert Cialdini has 230 highlights.
That's a lot.
That is a lot. Willpower by Roy Baumeister and John Tierney, 104 highlights, right? Before You Know It by John Barge, 175 highlights. All right.
Yeah. How many with Behave?
Behave, 572 highlights. 572 highlights with this book. This is just amazing. So if there's one book, if you haven't read it, because you won't be able to finish it in 2020, even if you bought it today. But if there's a book to read in 2021, I would highly recommend Behave by Robert Sapolsky.
And Behave will absolutely rise to the top as winning the award for the best footnotes ever. Sapolsky is fantastic. He's a terrific writer, but his footnotes are so great, so fun.
That's very true. Very true. All right, Tim, how about you?
Well, I'm going to turn to one of our guests, How to Decide by Annie Duke. And not just because we're in the acknowledgments, which is super sweet of her. It's a damn good book on how to decide. For me, she brings great concepts to life. This is the how-to guide, right? This is how to take all the really cool science and actually put it into application. And she introduces the archer's mindset, which for me was a big deal. I really loved, and I use this concept in the way that I think about decision making, about putting some shape and boundaries around what is the size and scope of the target that I'm trying to reach, not just what the bullseye is. And that's been really helpful for me in my own decision making and moving forward with things.
Yeah, I would second that as a top 10 book for me. And because it is, I talked about Behave as being this book to read because it just gives you this big understanding of why we do what we do. So How to Decide is the most practical book that we've read this year, of if you want to actually apply this stuff to make your life better. Mm-hmm. My God, Annie does a fantastic job to give you exercises and little pieces of information that you can use in your daily life to improve how you think and how you make decisions. I mean, just the idea of educated guesses and how you put parameters around those. And in our interview with her, I loved when we were talking about Drake and looking at, the number of number one, right. and the way that she used the way to process that information to actually get a pretty good educated guess at the number or top 10 songs that Drake had. And it's a great how-to book, which is, in the title, How to Decide. So
yeah,
there you go.
Fantastic. Okay, what's your number 2?
I don't know. The rest of them I don't think are in any particular order, but it was again somebody we interviewed, Wendy Wood, who wrote a book, Good Habit, Bad Habit. It was written not this year, but I read it this year. Fantastic book that talks about how habits are formed, what you can do in order to improve how you use habits to reinforce the good habits that we have and to be able to break some of the bad habits that we have. I've read a lot on habits. Habits is one of those areas that I just find fascinating. And we use it as part of the work that we do, but also just from a personal perspective in how do you develop good habits and all of those. And Wendy's book is, in my opinion, most of the books on habits have been written by authors who look at the research, which is fantastic because they write well. They're able to,
like Charles Duhigg. Yeah.
Charles Duhigg,
fantastic.
even Adam Grant in
James Clear.
or James Clear. Sorry, not Adam Grant. James Clear in Atomic Habits. They're not necessarily researchers. Wendy is a researcher. And so she uses a lot of her own studies to really highlight these points, but she does it in such a way that is really fascinating and easy to read. But again, a very applicable book. You can take what she says and apply it, immediately into your own life, which is fantastic.
I've been familiar with the habit literature for some time, and Duhigg and Fogg and James Clear and those guys. It wasn't until I read Wendy's book that I really started to see the connection between living a happy life and forming good habits.
Yeah.
Like for some reason, the way she framed it really brought this idea that the choices that we make in our habit development lead to happiness in our life. And that was a big aha for me. So and Carson, she was a fantastic guest as well.
Yeah.
But I think that would absolutely be one of my top books as well, Kurt.
All right.
Okay. My next book is going to go to, my next pick is going to Michael Halsworth and Elspeth Kirkman with Behavioral Insights.
Oh my gosh.
Fantastic book on, this, it's part of the MIT series for providing an overview. Yeah. And I see you've actually got your copy with all marked up and all the notes in it. It's fantastic. But maybe the most important thing for me was, as someone who is practicing and applying behavioral science, they very carefully and very intentionally laid out the design process, how you're going to lay out and design a behavior change initiative. And 7 of the 10 steps are basically preparing the design. And I love the fact that they really take so much care to say the most important thing that you're going to do is design this. Yeah. That was the big takeaway for me. How about for you, Kurt?
Oh, again, fantastic book. And because this is a paper copy, like an actual physical copy I have, it doesn't go into Readwise, but I'd have to assume, the number of highlights that I have in here, I don't think it would reach up to Behave level, but man, it would be in the hundreds, if multiple hundreds. It is just a fantastic book with just these wonderfully written insights into both this concept, as you said, about how to apply this and how do you design these interventions, but also really overviewing how this works and why it's important. And those, I think that combination, in reality, I was going into it, I was kind of going, all right, it's another book on just kind of the overview of behavioral science. And I left going, wow, this summarizes kind of the history, but also gives a really practical application and is written beautifully. It is just one of the just well-written book that I've read. So.
Yeah, and accurately. Oh my gosh, there's just not a word out of place. It's really fantastically written. So, Okay, what's next on your list?
I'm going to go with Scarcity by Sendel Mullainathan and Eldar Shafir. And again, it was written a long time ago. But I just got around to reading it this year. Mm-hmm. Yep. And again, what I like about this book is that it talks about scarcity in this larger picture. Scarcity, not just from a financial scarcity, but time scarcity, attention scarcity, variety of different things, and shows how prevalent that is in some of the detriments that we have as people and what that causes us to do, from making decisions that aren't necessarily in our optimal long-term outcome to a decrease in IQ to a number of different factors. And it is just one of those books that got me thinking about this in a much broader sense, that this idea of scarcity, that this piece that if we feel like we don't have enough time, if we feel like we don't have enough money, if we feel like we aren't having enough ability to pay attention to things, the impact that has on us is much more than what I would have assumed cognitively thinking about this. So again, a fascinating book.
Yeah, I don't know Elder's work all that well, but I'm pretty familiar with Sendel's work across a variety of domains. And this is a fantastic book, Scarcity, really. It's not so much from an evolutionary perspective, but like you said, it's about the behavior of that we have today and how the mindsets and the experiences and the contexts influence us in our decision making. It is fantastic.
Yeah. All right. Okay. What's next for you?
So the next on my list is a book that I didn't want to love. I'm just going to tell you that.
So what do you mean? Well, why didn't you want to love this book?
I've known Rory for a bunch of years and have had many conversations with him that he is such a smart guy. And it's like, okay, is the book just going to be a retread of all the things that we talked about? And actually, before it was published, he and I had a conversation about, Alchemy. He said, I'm stealing your business name because my consultancy is Behavior Alchemy. He said, I hope you don't mind, but it's a great term. And so I'm using it for the book. I'm like, and I'm thinking in the back of my mind, I'm not going to love this book. It's just going to be a retread. Then I read it and I loved the book. Alchemy by Rory Sutherland is a fantastic book filled with great insights, really, really clever and thoughtful things, the way he turns things around that just make you go, yeah, what if we just turn the kaleidoscope around? What if we just turn the telescope around and look the other way? We could get so much more insight. It's fantastic. I loved it.
Yeah. Well, my worry was Rory is such a great person when you talk to him or when you hear him. And he has such a way of bringing these insights to life. And he has a big personality, right? He's a big personality in life. And it's just captivating and engaging. And I was really worried that he wasn't going to be able to capture that in a book. And he did.
He
captured that aspect of his person. And so it comes through in the book and you read it and you smile and you laugh and you get these wonderful, as you said, these twists, this little idea of, you can spend $1 billion to improve, how fast you go through the channel between England and France. And yet, from an overall enjoyment perspective, wouldn't it be better just to put models on the train? And so,
right.
At a fraction of that cost. Right. As opposed to redoing all of this. And that's the way he thinks. And it's the way that he looks at the world. And it's a wonderful book to be able to get you, the reader, to take that perspective and to think about things, as he said in our interview, the opposite of a good idea is sometimes a good idea.
Right.
And that really shines through in this. So,
yeah. Okay. What's your next?
So again, my next one isn't necessarily a behavioral science book. So I will preface that, but it's Think Like a Rocket Scientist by Osan, who I've been following. He has a newsletter that has gone out for a number of years, and I've been following him. And he just has a wonderful way of looking at the world. And this book is a wonderful summation of that. Basically, it tells his story. He was a rocket scientist who's come into a world of helping people improve how they work and think and different things. And this idea of taking a perspective on the world from looking at it as a rocket scientist would is a rational perspective. And we know that we are emotional creatures, but he brings in some really wonderful pieces of, hey, we can improve our life if we think about things in a different way and in a way that maybe a rocket scientist would do it. And it's a nice theme that pulls throughout his entire book, but he has some wonderful just stories and examples. And again, it got me, after reading it, I was thinking differently. And that for me is the biggest testament that a book can have, is when it gets me to actually think differently and to view the world with a different lens. Wow. just go for that.
I have not read the book, and so I don't have anything to comment, but just this idea of thinking differently is so important to both of us. And it came out in a conversation we had today with a couple of researchers in Spain who we're going to be interviewing in the months to come. And one of them said, Pablo said, so I know it was a good day when I had one perspective, one way of thinking about something at the beginning of the day, and then new data got introduced to me, and then at the end of the day, I was thinking something differently. I was like,
exactly,
that's so beautiful.
Exactly. All right, who's next for you?
Messengers, who we listen to, who we don't, and why. Steve Martin and Joe Marks. Oh man, those guys just killed it. They absolutely killed it. Now, they have new research to bring to this, and I think that it was really valuable. And they're standing on the shoulders of a lot of really great research about messaging and communication, authenticity, things like this. But maybe one of the coolest things that I took away from the book wasn't just about the messenger, but it was the truthfulness versus trustworthiness side. That we have this ability in our brain to separate who we can, like, we will take someone who we consider trustworthy over someone who is truthful. And that was a bit of a mind blower. And of course, this is something I know that you want to talk about, and it's so applicable in the world that we're living in right now.
Yeah, what I loved about this book is it brings to light a lot of, if you look at the news today and you look at the political divisions that we have and you wonder, whatever side of the political spectrum you're on, how the other side can believe what they're believing in the face, as you said, of the truth that's out there. And yet we still have people who are, doubling and tripling and quadrupling down on things that by all objective measures are not there. This book goes in and it allows you an insight into why some people are doing that, why we do that. And again, that's on either side of the political spectrum, but it is this idea that the messenger, it's the messenger who brings what they say is who the messenger is just as important, if oftentimes more important than the content itself.
Yeah.
So again, going back to your truthfulness versus trustworthiness, this idea, and it's a really well-researched book. It has a wonderful thread through it that brings back this research, but then brings it into a really easy read. Again, just fantastic.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, Kurt, what's next on your list?
All right. So my rounding out my top five. Again, one of the guests that we had, and again, this is an older book. It's Before You Know It by John Berger. And anybody who's listened to this podcast knows that I am a big priming advocate, believer, whatever it would be that you want to call it. And John is obviously, one of the main investigators who have brought automaticity into the limelight and done it. And there's been, obviously, as we've talked about on the show, elements of replication that maybe aren't there. But this book, again, is just this, brings to light the breadth of all of this research, all of the various different research insights on priming and automaticity, and gets into why this works and what are some of the hypotheses behind the concept of priming and how it actually works within our brain in order to influence our behavior. And it's just, again, a well-written book. And I know, from your perspective, there's a lot of musical references in it because John is a big musical guy. So There's some really fun pieces. It's an easy, good read. And again, I just found it got me thinking, and it changed the way that I was thinking about some of this stuff.
Well, and at a very core level, it reveals on a very deep level how curious John Berger is, right? That he has this intense curiosity and follows that curiosity. So I think all of us have a little bit of curiosity about things, but John, he digs in and is a fabulous researcher in large part because of his curiosity. So
fantastic. All right, your last one.
So my last one in the top 5 is by Tim Ash. It's Unleash Your Primal Brain. Now that book is actually hitting the market in just a couple of months, but we got a pre-read on it, and it's, you know what, this is again is like, oh, am I really going to like this? And then I started reading and it was like, fantastic. It's really well written. It's incredibly well researched, and Tim brings refreshing, really thoughtful. I know, kind of a coalition or a collision of really good ideas together to help us understand the connection between our evolutionary psychology and our behavior today. So I just loved it, and just want to make it. Want to really recommend people go out and grab it when it comes onto the market in April.
Yeah, it's a fantastic book that, again, brings to light some of the elements of evolutionary psychology into a real world application of what that means for us, what it means for our everyday behaviors, which is, again, it's been talked about, it's been discussed, but Tim brings a nice, fresh perspective on it. Mm-hmm. And he, again, backs it up with a lot of great research. And so it's a wonderful read. And actually, we haven't released his interview yet, but that's coming out soon, or will come out probably right before the book.
In April 2021.
As well. So stay tuned for that, folks.
Should we talk about some honorable mentions?
Oh my gosh! we could go on and on and on, but this would be in multiple hours of yes. podcast that everybody would get really bored with. But yeah, I think we each have about 4 or 5, 6 honorable mentions, and so I'll just go with mine really quick. Indistractable by Nir Eyal, great book. Wonderful insights. Engaged by Amy Bucher. Again, we interviewed her, but the book is just, it's a beautiful book. It's full color, really wonderful book just from a visual perspective. But the content in it, if you are a designer, if you are looking and trying to get people engaged with what you're doing and the products you're designing or the services that you're providing, great book. Ripple by Jez Groom and April Velicott. Oh my gosh. They bring, again, similar to Rory, this book that just brings to life these concepts in a real world application perspective. Wow. Fantastic. Robert Glazer, another guy that I subscribe to his newsletter, and he wrote this book, Elevate. It's just a wonderful book that, kind of gives you hope in a world that sometimes doesn't always have as much hope as we would want. Designing for Behavior Change by Steve Wendell. Again, he had him as a guest. The book is fantastic, particularly if you are thinking of utilizing behavioral science in your work. Great book because it gives you practical insights into how do you design for behavior change? How do you design products? How do you design processes, various different pieces? And the last one is Invisible Influence by Jonah Berger, who, again, it goes into some of this aspects of priming and looking at all these invisible influences that are impacting why we do what we do. Fantastic book, really well written, and just love them all. Could go on and on, but I'll cut it off there.
So in my honorable mention category, I want to start by going off territory here, off the farm. Start with White Fragility by Robin DiAngelo. Given the social unrest this year, especially in Minneapolis here, where you and I live, Kurt, very important book to read if you are white. I highly recommend White Fragility. It's a really great perspective on racism in the world, and I think that's pretty fantastic. All or Nothing Marriage: How the Best Marriages Work by Eli Finkel. Right, that was so fun. And again, it was one of those books like, wow, really great insights on relationships.
And again, on that, just really quick, it's one that has changed how I interact with my wife. It influenced my world, and not just my world, my family. So thank you for that, Eli, because it's wonderful.
Another one of those that actually had a big impact on relationship is The Power of Bad, Roy Baumeister and John Tierney's book, with the 4-to-1 rule. It's you got to check it out. It's a really good read, and it's wonderfully written and very good. I also want to call out one of my heroes, Max Bazerman's book, Better, Not Perfect, which is a really beautiful story about ethics and the application of behavioral science for good. And Ashley Willen's book, Time Smart, is fantastic. We have not had her as a guest, but holy smokes, the idea that we are time poor and time management poor across the world, not just is a terrific story. And Blind Sight. Holy cow!
Yes.
Bruce Allen and Matt Johnson's Blind Sight, bringing lots of cool insights to the world of marketing, which you and I have spent a lot of time, of our careers in. This is fantastic. Blind Sight was a great read.
Yeah, this idea of midliminal, right? This concept is a again fascinating read. Great insights for anybody who is in marketing, advertising, sales. Their insights are fantastic.
Yeah.
All right. I mean, I don't know. I think we've talked that through, and I don't know.
There's more. I'm sure
we could go on and on and on, but those are the books, and there's only so many. As you know, we have a time deficit. There's only so much time in the day to listen to podcasts and to read, and I know we'd love to get more. But so I think that wraps it up, right? Wraps up the best behavioral book list for 2020, and we hope that you have enjoyed this discussion.
Yeah, I hope so too. We also hope you check out the links in the show notes for all the books that sounded interesting to you. Don't waste any time. Just go out to your favorite local bookstore and pick them up.
Or Amazon. You can go out to Amazon. A lot of people buy all of their books on Amazon, particularly in the pandemic, right?
I know. True enough. Okay. And, Amazon was my go-to for books in those days before there were really other options. So, okay. Now it just seems like lots of bookstores have warehouses. And if you wanted to order from a local business, then I'm just going to put that out there as being a good thing.
Yeah, so support your local business. That's probably a really good thing. Go out there and do that, particularly in this time of pandemic. So I will take your lead on that, Tim.
But if you don't want to support your local business, buy from Amazon. Is the parenthetical on that?
I don't know. Sometimes there's less friction, and that is another piece, which is another great book that I read this year that we didn't even talk about. Roger Dooley's Friction. Oh my God, that was another fantastic book.
I think that was.
I might have read that last year, so maybe that's why. But again, another good book. Anyway, good enough, Tim. Let's just end this discussion with a thank you to all of our listeners and to all of the wonderful authors that we had as guests.
Yeah.
And we hope that you just have a fantastic week and go out and find your groove.